Hello, I'm Liam Turner, CIH's digital editor. The new government has set challenging housing targets, but will it achieve them? That's the title of a chapter written by CIH's John Perry in the latest UK Housing Review. To gain some further insight into whether or not the government is likely to pull off its housing ambitions, I sat down with John to delve into some of the detail in his chapter. Okay, so we'll start off as we usually do with these chats by getting stuck straight into the discussion. But before I get into some of my questions, could you just start off, John, by giving an overview of your chapter and what and the topic it explores?
Well, Labour has set a pretty ambitious target of building 1.5 million homes over 5 years, which a few years ago perhaps wouldn't have been ambitious, but supply has fallen so much that it now is. And it's got a range of measures in hand to achieve this target. And I suppose the question is, will they work? And will they work fast enough? And that's what the chapter is about.
Yeah.
So it means we think it means building about 350,000 more homes over 5 years than current performance would suggest. But it could be even more than that if we find that the output in the last financial year, which we don't know the figures for yet, is even lower than we expect.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess well, Labour has talked a lot about kind of, growing the economy, building a stronger economy. To what extent do their housing ambitions depend on whether or not they deliver on their economic goals?
I think the economic goals are actually crucial to achieving this target because they're relying inevitably fairly heavily on the private sector and the private market. Um, as an article by Peter Williams in the briefing paper shows, there's a suppressed appetite for home ownership, and I guess Labour is hoping that the economic improvement, stable interest rates, rising real incomes, will boost the market sufficiently that it drives up output from the private sector.
Yeah,
But of course, there are problems about that. They're going from a very low base, and we don't expect, or the sector doesn't expect, growth to take place this year, 2024, although it is
mm,
forecasting growth in 2025. But again, from a pretty low base. So
yeah,
it's Labour's got a poor starting point
yeah.
handed to it by the previous government. And the question really is, will the economy get into gear fast enough to enable the private market to expand fast enough?
Yeah. And of course, a big part of their plan to kind of boost house building and increase the delivery of new homes is, the proposed planning reforms. To what extent will those proposals help the new government to achieve their ambitions in this area?
Well, we've got a wide range of proposals. The most immediate one is their action to release stalled sites,
Hmm.
stalled developments, and they're planning to expedite 200 stalled developments. So if that took place fairly soon, that would obviously help to boost output. But the others are longer range, or longer term. The change in the national planning policy framework,
Yeah.
the release of Greenbelt, improvements to the CPO, compulsory purchase procedure,
Mm.
reform of land values, the new town commission, and others that are expected. They're all very important measures, but they'll take 4 to 5 years at least to
Yeah.
have an effect on supply.
Yeah. So I guess link to that then. I know that the chapter kind of covers this a bit early on, is the fact that if Labour is going to achieve its goal of delivering 1.5 million new homes by the end of the Parliament, it's looking as though it might actually fall short of the 300,000 homes a year figure in the early years. and then kind of make up for that later on. I guess is that the case if they are going to achieve their 1.5 million homes ambition? Is that the way it's going to go?
Yes, I think so. In the review, we set out a possible target for each year up to the end of the 5 years. And others like the National Housing Federation and Savills in a recent report they did have done the
Yeah,
same. Obviously, the initial growth in output will be limited, but it'll have to be fairly substantial towards the end of the 5 year period.
yeah,
Um, and that within that, there's, as you know, there's a lot of reliance on the social sector, and perhaps there needs to be even more reliance on the social sector given the uncertainty about the performance of the private market. And we're suggesting that the output of the social sector, which is around 60,000 homes per year at the moment, when I say at the moment, I mean in the year 2022-23,
hmm
that will have to grow to about 90,000
yeah,
a year. And that in itself, of course, is problematic because we're seeing output decline in the social sector from the reports from housing associations and local authorities. And Labour will need to try and turn that round.
yeah. One thing we haven't talked about yet is new towns, especially in I guess the run up to the election. Labour talked quite a bit around its plans for new towns, and I guess you know, since they've come into power, that hasn't really been a particular focus of kind of any of their announcements. Although I understand that they are kind of working on their plans behind the scenes. But to what extent will these new towns kind of help the government to deliver on its housing targets?
Well, they themselves have said that there won't be spades in the ground for 5 years. So it will certainly help them achieve a future
Yeah,
target
yeah,
if there are two Labour governments and they set a similar target or a higher target for the second one.
yeah,
And I think obviously we very much support the idea of having new towns. Um, there's a very urgent need to recognise, which I think Labour probably does recognise, that new towns have to be properly planned as they were,
mm,
when the original new towns were built decades ago. That they need to be built with the shops, health
yeah,
facilities, infrastructure, and so on needed for them to be proper settlements. And I think we've got to learn from some of the false starts that were made by the previous government, like the development of Northstowe in Cambridgeshire, which the BBC described the other day as the broken promise of a new town.
mm,
Um, so we hopefully, having set up this commission, which seems to have some useful people in it, that need for proper planning will be
mm,
properly recognised. There is another downside, though, that's the government obviously needs to boost the capacity of the planning profession so that it can deliver more homes generally.
yeah,
But the planning jobs developing new towns will be far more attractive to new planners than the jobs handling development control in small districts.
yeah,
So it will highlight the capacity problem in the planning system, perhaps even more than they've highlighted it so far.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And from what you're saying, then I mean, yeah, these plans for new towns, they might or they are likely to have, an impact on housing delivery eventually, but it's unlikely that we'll see any kind of uh, uh, evidence of that within this parliament anyway. Um,
We might towards the end, but it's very much towards the end. And
yeah,
really, Labour have got to, if they're serious about the 1.5 million homes target, they've got to concentrate on other aspects of
yeah,
the
yeah,
system. And very importantly, I think recognise the increased contribution that will have to be made by the social sector.
yeah, yeah. Of course, yeah, yeah. And speaking of the social sector, I think by and large, the sector welcomes the government's ambitions around kind of house building and delivering more homes. But I guess the big question here is, are they being too ambitious, or perhaps a better question might be, are they being realistic?
It's difficult to say. I think that my attitude towards this is that the sector has been generally welcoming because they want a government that wants to build new homes,
Yeah,
and obviously they've been expressing caution or pointing out the obstacles. But at least if you've got a government that set a target, you can then say, well, look, in order to achieve this target, we need you to do X, Y, and Z. So I think that's very
yeah,
positive. And we've seen positive signs so far. The Chancellor seems to be moving towards changing fiscal rules so that
mm,
there
mm,
can be more investment. And we hope that that will benefit investment in housing as well as investment in other sorts of infrastructure. Um, there seem to be signs that there may be some boost to the current program in the budget in a couple of weeks' time. We've suggested that this might be achieved by redeploying some of the ministry's capital program, because as the annual review shows each year, about half of the department's capital program actually goes on the private sector, and some of those
yeah,
private sector programs are underperforming. That money could potentially be switched back into the last stages of the current affordable homes program. Um,
yeah,
and also another factor to mention, perhaps potentially benefiting local authorities, is the appetite for right to buy reforms.
hmm,
So that if the government does, for example, cut discounts for right to buy sales, that will help local authorities, especially those who've decided they don't want to build yet, because they know that if they build new homes, they'll have to quickly sell them to sitting tenants um, at reduced prices. So I think that would help, and would be a boost to the local authority side. And there's certainly, I think, quite an appetite for within local authorities to build,
yeah,
and the government has to release that, I think, partly by the right to buy reforms and also by addressing the problems about housing revenue accounts.
yeah.